So here's more of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When we left them yesterday, they had refused to bow down to the idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had built. And because of that, the king had told his soldiers not only to throw them into a fiery furnace that he used for getting rid of people he didn't like, but that they should even heat it up 7 times hotter than they normally did. And we saw them marching off into the furnace. Here's how the story begins today. The soldiers tied Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's hands and took them to the furnace. It was very, very hot, and the guards threw them into the fire. Suddenly, the king jumped up right out of his seat. "Wait a minute," he exclaimed. "We only threw 3 men in the furnace." 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 3. "Now I see 4 people walking around in the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and somebody? Somebody? Who's this other person? You don't hang out in the furnace waiting for friends to come over. You don't just play around in the fire. That's very dangerous under any circumstances, especially not if it's hot enough to kill you." He looked in. He said, "Now I see 4 people walking around in the fire, and the 4th one looks like an angel. An angel? Oh. And look, their hands are no longer tied, and they don't seem to be harmed." Here's the picture. See the king looking into the furnace, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then over one of them's shoulder. Over, I don't know which one that would be. Let's say that's Shadrach's shoulder. There's an angel that's watching. And boy, was the king surprised. The guards all looked into the scorching flames, and the king was right. An angel of God had come into the furnace and made sure that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stayed safe. And that's when the king shouted right into the fire, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out of there right now!" I bet they weren't all that upset about leaving the fire, even with an angel there. They probably were glad to get out of there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fiery furnace, and everybody gathered around them to see what had happened. I imagine that you would do the same thing if friends of yours had been in trouble and in danger, and they'd somehow escaped with the help of an angel that God had sent to be with them. You better believe people would gather around and say, "Hey, tell us what happened. Really, is this really you? Are you okay?" Well, everybody gathered around, and they were surprised to see that not a hair on their heads, not a thread of their clothing had been touched by the flames or by the fire. And they didn't even smell like smoke. Nobody could believe what they saw. Well, the king, he had his problems, but he was no complete dummy. The king said, "Let us give praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had such strong faith that they would rather face a fiery furnace than bow down to a golden idol. Their God must be the one true God." The king knew how to draw a good conclusion from things, because the idol wouldn't have saved them. But God did. Because God, the real God, isn't some statue that can be worshipped. The real God is watching, is taking care, is making sure people are all right, even when they're in danger. And a lot of times if people have been in danger and they come through it safely, they can recognize and see, hey, God did help us out somewhere along the line. Well, the king, who, like I said, he was not really all that bright, but he wasn't totally stupid either. He made a new law right then and right there. He said, no one should say anything bad about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then he went back to being Nebuchadnezzar. He said, if they do, they shall be punished. Because he liked to prove that he was king. But the other thing he said is, there is no other God who can save his people like the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's true. There is nobody that can help us the way that God helps us. And he does it in a lot of different ways. And you can always depend on him whenever there's trouble. No matter how bad it gets. God is still with us and still wants to help in some way. Don't forget that. And you can sleep on it. And I'll see you tomorrow. Okay? Bye-bye.